ball moves forward into space. It rolls across the grass at an angle, not struck particularly hard, just placed into a gap that appeared for a second and then closed again. A forward begins to move toward it. The run starts before the pass does, which is the thing most people miss when they watch. There is no sudden burst, no sharp change of direction, just a steady, deliberate movement, timed carefully against where the ball is going to be, not where it is. A defender tracks back. He is quick, and he knows where the forward is heading. Another defender shifts across, cutting off the angle toward goal. The space narrows. The options become limited. And yet, somehow the forward arrives at the ball first. Not because he was faster, not because he made a particularly clever move, but because he read the situation slightly earlier than everyone else, and he never stopped moving. The play continues. A pass is made to a teammate. The forward, having just completed one run, immediately begins a second one. Not because the ball is coming to him, not because the opportunity is obvious, just because that is what he does. He keeps moving. He keeps finding spaces. He keeps making himself available. And this, more than any single goal or moment of skill, is the thing that defined how he played. He runs again, and then again. The same movement, repeated without hesitation. The same effort, regardless of whether the ball arrives. There is a kind of endurance in it, a willingness to do the work that does not always lead to recognition. Tonight, we follow a forward defined by stamina, discipline, and a quiet kind of persistence. His name is Dirk Kuyt, and for nearly 2 decades, across 4 countries and some of the biggest clubs in European football, he was one of the most reliable, consistent, and selfless forwards the game has seen. Not always the most celebrated, not always the player whose name was spoken first when people talked about his teams, but there, always, running, pressing, working, contributing in ways that only become fully visible when you remove him from the picture. His story begins in a small Dutch coastal town near the North Sea. Katwijk is a small town on the west coast of the Netherlands, about 12 kilometers northwest of Leiden. It sits where the Rhine reaches the sea, and for much of its history, it has been a fishing town. The harbour, the boats, the smell of the sea in the morning. These are the things that define daily life there for generations. It is not a glamorous place. It is a working town, modest and practical, and the people who grew up there tended to carry something of that character with them. Dirk Kuyt was born there on the 22nd of July, 1980. He was raised in a community where football was a significant part of social life, but where it existed alongside ordinary things: school, work, family, the rhythms of a town that did not revolve around professional sport. The local club was Quick Boys, founded in 1918, a name with a certain irony given what Kuyt would later become known for. Not quick, exactly, but constantly moving, never still. He joined Quick Boys as a young boy and spent his formative years there. The club played in the lower tiers of Dutch football, far removed from the Eredivisie, far removed from the professional game. But it was a club with a culture of commitment, of showing up and working, and it was here that the foundations of his playing style were established. Not in an academy with cutting-edge training methods and professional coaches. In a local club, in a coastal town, learning the game in the most ordinary way possible. By the time he was developing into a serious player, most of his future peers in professional football had already been identified and taken into academies at 14, 15, 16. The major Dutch clubs had well-established systems for spotting talent early, and the pathway from those academies to the professional game was relatively clear. Kuyt was not part of that world. He was progressing through the lower divisions, playing for a club that existed at a different level entirely. This late development, relative to the professional football timeline, meant that when he did make the step up, he was already more formed than many players are when they first enter that environment. He had developed his understanding of the game in a context where no one was doing things for him, where the organization, the pressing, the running, all of it had to come from the players themselves. He arrived in professional football with habits already built. His first senior professional club was FC Utrecht, where he joined in 1998. Utrecht is a mid-sized city in the center of the Netherlands, and the football club has a history of developing players who go on to perform at a higher level. It was not one of the glamour clubs of Dutch football, not Ajax, not PSV, not Feyenoord, but it was a serious club with a serious professional environment, and it gave Kuyt something he would not have received anywhere else at that stage of his career. In his early years at Utrecht, he was used primarily as a winger. The attributes he had, his energy, his ability to get forward and press defenders, his willingness to track back and contribute defensively, suited wide positions, and that is where he was deployed. But it became clear over time that his most significant contribution was not in creating chances for others, but in finishing them himself. He had a good sense of where the ball was going to arrive in the penalty area. He anticipated second balls well. He was reliable from close range. The transition from winger to central striker happened gradually, and it was one that he embraced rather than resisted. He understood that his career was still developing, that he was still proving himself in professional football, and adapting his role was simply part of that process. There was no public resistance, no suggestion that he found the change difficult. He simply got on with it. At Utrecht, he developed into a consistent goalscorer. Not the most prolific in the Eredivisie, not someone producing the kind of numbers that generated transfer speculation early on, but reliable. Season after season, he contributed. He played his role within the team's structure. He earned a reputation among coaches and teammates as someone who trained well, who took his preparation seriously, and who could be trusted to do what was asked of him. Opponents who played against him in those Utrecht years would later describe something that became a consistent theme throughout his career. The sense that he was always there, that even when he was not the most dangerous player on the pitch technically, there was a constant awareness of where he was, because he was always moving, always in spaces, always making it necessary to account for him. This kind of constant, purposeful movement is difficult to quantify, but very clear to experience on a football pitch, and it was already present in those early professional years. The move to Feyenoord came in 2003. Feyenoord is one of the three great Dutch clubs, alongside Ajax and PSV, and the transfer represented a significant step up for Kuyt. The club is based in Rotterdam, a port city with a working-class identity that suited the kind of player Kuyt had become. Feyenoord's supporters valued effort and commitment alongside skill. They responded to players who ran hard, who pressed, who gave everything on the pitch. Kuyt arrived as someone who fitted that identity naturally. De Kuip, Feyenoord Stadium, is one of the great football grounds in Europe. It holds around 50,000 people, and on match days, the atmosphere it generates is significant. The noise comes from all directions, and there is a particular intensity to the way the supporters connect with their players. For a player whose career had started at Quick Boys in the lower divisions, arriving at a stadium like De Kuip and being received as a serious first-team player was a substantial moment. His development at Feyenoord continued the upward curve that had started at Utrecht. He became one of the most reliable strikers in the Eredivisie, and in the 2004 to 2005 season, he won the Eredivisie Golden Boot, finishing as the league's top scorer. This was not a minor achievement. The Eredivisie produced serious players and serious competition, and leading the scoring charts in any given season required consistent, high-level performance. It confirmed what his coaches and teammates had seen across several seasons, that he was a genuinely effective goalscorer, operating at the top of Dutch football. During his time at Feyenoord, he was also given the captaincy. This reflected something beyond his footballing ability. It reflected the way he conducted himself, his approach to training, his attitude in difficult periods, his consistency in how he treated the responsibilities of being a professional footballer. These were the qualities that led to him being trusted with the armband. Captains are chosen differently by different clubs, but one consistent thread is that they tend to be players who the group responds to, players whose work ethic sets an example that does not need to be stated explicitly. Teammates at Feyenoord spoke about his professionalism in terms that went beyond the cliché version of that word. The things that were noted were specific: how he prepared for matches, how he managed his body, how he approached the periods between games. Maintaining the kind of physical output he produced across a long season required discipline and attention to recovery. He was known to take that seriously, in a way that was not common in all dressing rooms of that era. His time at Feyenoord also gave him experience of European football. The club competed in UEFA competitions, and those experiences, against teams from different leagues with different styles, added layers to his game. He encountered different types of defending, different pressing styles, different physical demands, and he adapted. The adaptability that had been present since the transition from winger to striker continued to develop throughout this period. By 2006, Feyenoord and Liverpool were in discussions about a transfer. Liverpool, managed at the time by Rafael Benitez, were looking to add depth and competition to their attacking options. The fee involved was around €9 million, which was a significant investment and also a statement about how the club valued what Kuyt would bring. He arrived on Merseyside in the summer of 2006, signed a long-term contract, and began the process of adjusting to a new country, a new league, and a new style of football. The Premier League in 2006 was a different environment from the Eredivisie in ways that were immediately apparent to players arriving from the Netherlands. The physical intensity was higher, particularly from midfield players. The pace of play in the midfield third was faster, and the space available to operate in was smaller, defended more aggressively. For a striker whose game depended partly on movement and positioning, these were conditions that required adjustment. Benitez was a manager known for his tactical precision. He prepared his teams very specifically for opponents, and his sessions were organized with a level of detail that players who had come from different environments sometimes found striking. Kuyt, whose approach to preparation was already serious, adapted to this environment well. The kind of focused, structured work that Benitez demanded in training was compatible with the way Kuyt had always operated. His early period at Anfield saw him used in different roles depending on the match and the opponent. Benitez rotated his attacking players, used different combinations, and Kuyt's willingness to play in different positions was useful. He could operate centrally, could play wide, could press from the front, and could drop into more withdrawn areas. This flexibility, which had developed across his years at Utrecht and Feyenoord, became central to his value at Liverpool. Anfield, like de Kuyt, was a stadium with a particular atmosphere. The history of the club was present in everything, in the architecture, in the way supporters spoke about the institution, in the expectations that surrounded every home game. For a player arriving from outside England, Understanding and adapting to that environment required more than just footballing adjustment. It required finding a place within the culture of the club, understanding what it meant to play there. By most accounts, this was not something Kuyt struggled with. The 2006 to 2007 season brought Liverpool a significant Champions League run. The club reached the final, played in Athens against AC Milan. The journey to that final involved some notable performances, and Kuyt contributed across the campaign. His role was not always the most visible. He was not the player producing moments of individual brilliance, but his contribution in terms of pressing, positioning, and the work done off the ball was consistent throughout. In the final itself, against a Milan side that had beaten Liverpool 2 years earlier in Istanbul, in one of the most dramatic matches in the competition's history, Kuyt scored. Liverpool lost the match, but his goal, his contribution at that level, in that occasion, was a marker of how far he had come since his years at Quick Boys. The gap between those 2 points in his career was substantial in every respect, and he had covered it through the accumulation of consistent effort over many years. Throughout his time at Liverpool, there were individual goals that stood out, not for their brilliance, but for their timing and their context. He scored in derbies, in important league matches, in moments where a goal changed the situation. He was not a striker who scored 30 goals in a season, but he was a player who scored goals when they mattered. And this distinction is meaningful. The difference between a player who scores frequently and a player who scores in important moments is real, even if it is harder to measure. His pressing game, which has been discussed in football analysis since, predated the broader recognition of pressing as a tactical concept in English football. By the time Jurgen Klopp arrived at Liverpool in 2015, and pressing became the defining characteristic of the club's style, the language to describe what Kuyt had been doing for years was already established. But when he arrived in 2006, pressing forwards were not the standard. His defensive contribution from the front, the ground he covered when the team did not have the ball, the pressure he applied to defenders in possession, was something that coaches noticed and valued, even when it did not appear in any statistical record. Defenders who played against him noted the peculiar challenge of facing a forward who never switched off. Most attacking players, once a chance has been missed or a play has broken down, take a moment before resetting. There is a slight mental and physical pause. Kuyt did not pause. He immediately shifted into the defensive phase, began pressing, began tracking. This relentlessness was not aggressive. It was not the frantic pressing of a player acting on emotion. It was systematic. It was a choice, made consistently, that made him genuinely difficult to prepare for, because it never changed regardless of the score or the phase of the match. His role at Liverpool evolved over time. As the club changed its tactical approach across different seasons, and as his own body naturally adapted to the demands of years in professional football, his position shifted. He operated more frequently from wide positions in the later stages of his Liverpool career, contributing differently from how he had contributed in his early years at the club. But the core qualities, the movement, the pressing, the defensive work from an attacking position, the reliability in key moments, remained consistent. The move to Fenerbahce in 2012 followed 6 years at Liverpool. Fenerbahce is one of the major clubs in Turkish football and one of the most supported clubs in the country. The Turkish League, the Super League, is a different competition from the Premier League or the Eredivisie, but it is a professional environment with a significant fan base and competitive pressure. Kuyt arrived as an experienced player with a history at the highest level of European football, and he was received as such. In Istanbul, he continued to perform as a consistent, reliable professional. His approach to the game did not change because the environment had changed. He trained the same way, prepared the same way, contributed in the same way. This consistency across different clubs, different countries, and different systems was one of the defining characteristics of his career. He was not a player who produced his best only in certain conditions. He adapted, contributed, and maintained his standards wherever he was. Turkish football has a particular atmosphere of its own. Fenerbahce's stadium, the Şükrü Saracoğlu at the time, is one of the louder grounds in Europe when full, and the intensity of the rivalry between the major Istanbul clubs is something that visiting players consistently describe as unlike anything else they have experienced. Kuyt had played at Anfield and Dirk Kuyt in Champions League finals and European nights, but the atmosphere of Istanbul derbies added a further chapter to his experience of what football can feel like at its most intense. He spent 3 seasons at Fenerbahce before the move that would complete his career story in the most fitting way possible. In 2015, he returned to Feyenoord. He was 34 years old, entering what was clearly the final phase of his playing career, but he did not arrive as a sentimental addition or a fading presence brought back for historical reasons. He arrived as a player who still had something to contribute, who still trained seriously, who still pressed and moved and worked in the ways that had always characterized him. The Feyenoord he returned to was a club building towards something. In the 2016-17 season, under manager Giovanni van Bronckhorst, the club would challenge for the Eredivisie title. It had been 18 years since Feyenoord had won the Dutch league, a long absence from the top of their domestic competition for a club with their history and stature. As the season developed and the title race tightened, Kuyt was part of a group that carried that momentum forward, match by match. The final day of that 2016-17 Eredivisie season is a moment in Dutch football history that will be remembered for a long time. Feyenoord played Heracles Almelo, needing to win to confirm the championship. What followed was something that even people who write scripts about football would hesitate to include on the grounds that it would seem too convenient. Dirk Kuyt, aged 36, in his final season as a professional footballer, scored a hat-trick. 3 goals in the decisive match, the match that clinched the title, in front of a Dirk Kuyt that was beyond capacity in its noise and emotion. The hat-trick came via a penalty, a header, and a free kick. The variety of the goals was itself a kind of summary of a career. He had scored in different ways, from different positions, with different parts of his body, across different eras. But it was the timing, the context, the fact that it happened on this particular day, in this particular match, that made it something beyond ordinary goal scoring. He had been part of the squad that last won the title in 1999. He had left, gone to Utrecht, to Liverpool, to Fenerbahce, and come back. And now, in the final match of his final season, he was the one finishing things off. The scenes at full time were extraordinary by any standard. Players, staff, supporters, all of it compressed into a moment of collective release after 18 years of waiting. And Kuyt, in the middle of it, 36 years old, having run and pressed and worked his whole career without ever receiving quite the attention given to more naturally gifted players, was the one who had scored 3 times. After retirement from playing in 2017, he moved into coaching, which was a natural continuation. A player who had thought as carefully about the game as he had, who had observed systems and tactics and team dynamics from the inside across so many years and so many different environments, had considerable knowledge to offer. He began his coaching journey with youth football in the Netherlands, progressing through the academy levels, learning the other side of the game's development, the qualities that had defined him as a player: attention to preparation, consistency, willingness to do the less visible work, ability to adapt to different circumstances, are the same qualities that tend to characterize effective coaches. The transition from playing to coaching is not easy for everyone, but for someone whose entire career had been built on understanding what work looks like when it is properly applied, the learning curve was approached in the way Kuyt approached everything else: steadily, without drama, with full commitment. Throughout his career, across all the clubs and all the competitions and all the different roles he played within different systems, something remained constant. It was not a particular technique. It was not a specific type of goal. It was the sense that in every match, in every training session, in every moment when the game required something from him, he gave what was available. Not always everything he would have wanted to give. Not always the decisive contribution, but always the complete version of what he had. This sounds simple. It is, in fact, one of the harder things to sustain across a career of nearly 2 decades. The demands of professional football are physical, yes, but they are also mental and emotional. The periods when things go wrong, when form dips, when the team is losing, when individual errors accumulate, test players in ways that go beyond the technical. The players who come through those periods in the same fundamental shape they were in before them are rarer than they might appear. Kuyt was one of those players. His teammates across different clubs spoke of his influence in similar terms, regardless of the country or the competition. The consistency with which these descriptions emerged: serious in training, reliable in matches, calm in difficult periods, never seeking credit for the work he did off the ball, suggested something genuine and stable, rather than a performance of professionalism. It was simply how he operated. There is a version of football analysis that would describe Kuyt as a system player, in the sense that his contributions were most visible within a well-organized team structure, rather than as an individual performer. There is some truth in this. His pressing worked best when the team pressed together. His movement was most effective when the team's shape created the spaces he was moving into. But this framing also undervalues something real: the fact that he made whatever system he was in better, that he made the players around him more effective by doing the things that are invisible until someone stops doing them. The final years at Feyenoord contained something that careers in sport rarely offer in such a clear form: a proper ending. Not a slow fade, not an injury-forced retirement, not a final season spent on the bench at a club that kept him out of sentiment. A title, a hat-trick, a full Dirk Kuyt, and then a clean stop. The story resolved itself neatly, in a way that does not always happen, and in a way that felt, if not scripted, then at least appropriate. There is something in the way he moved across the pitch throughout his career that stays with you once you have watched it carefully. Not the spectacular. He was not a spectacular footballer in the conventional sense, but the relentlessness. The second run after the first one has ended. The press when others have already decided the ball is too far gone. The arrival at the far post for the header that requires 3 different calculations to be correct before the ball has even been crossed. These things, repeated across 20 seasons of professional football, constitute a form of excellence that is different from the excellence that gets replicated in highlight packages, but no less real. His career reminds you that football produces different kinds of value, and that the most visible kind is not always the most meaningful kind. That the game is not only made by the players whose clips spread across the internet, but also by the players who make those players possible, who press the defenders to force the errors, who make the runs that pull the marking away, who stay goal side in the moments the other forward has given up. These contributions do not disappear because they are harder to show. They persist in the result, in the performances, in the memories of the players who were on the pitch alongside them. The long career, from Quick Boys to Utrecht, from Utrecht to Feyenoord, from Feyenoord to Liverpool, from Liverpool to Fenerbahce, and back to Feyenoord, traced a path through the game that did not always follow the most obvious route. There were moments where his place in his own teams was contested, where the balance of appearances shifted, where another player was preferred. But across all of that, he kept going. The runs kept coming. The pressing kept coming. The goals kept coming. In the moments that mattered. It is late now. The matches are long finished. The stadiums are empty, and the noise has left them. The stories from those years exist only in memory and record, in the testimony of teammates and opponents, and the numbers in statistical archives. But somewhere in that archive is the record of a player who ran, perhaps more than anyone else of his generation, without needing to be reminded why. A player who kept moving, even when the moment did not call for it. A presence that remained constant, long after the noise had faded. And slowly, the night grew quiet. Good night.